Hello and welcome back to another Demis Hellen tutorial. We are going to take a look at 3 tips to make your trance basses better today, and we're going to look at the first one, which is preset choice or preset design. Now you want to choose these correctly, and the reason for that is if you have a sound that's not quite right, or you think, does it really fit? If you're asking yourself that question, it's probably the wrong one for the track you're using. It doesn't mean that the actual preset or the sound that you've designed is wrong or incorrect. It's just not suited to the style you're making. So we have 2 ideas here. We've got a mid layer, and then I've got this duplicate mid layer / bad, which is currently muted. So I'm going to mute this mid layer bass as well, so we're just focusing on the sub and the first mid layer and then the percussion elements. So I've just dragged and dropped these in just to give you a nice overview of something that sounds remotely trance. You can see I added this mid layer here as well, just to give you kind of all 3 layers of the bass. It's a good sound if we mute this mid layer and activate this one. Let's just listen to it on its own. So there's nothing wrong with the preset design, there's nothing wrong with the sound, but does it suit the style that we are creating? Not as much. And the reason for that I will tell you in a second after we listen to this in context. So we can hear, yeah, it's a little bit too loud for the mix, and if we put that aside and we actually balance that out, it's still not the best sound for that. And we shouldn't be looking at the sound and thinking, oh, I could try and tidy that up. It's a case of just go and find another preset, design another sound, and then drop that in, and just make it in context with your track. Presets are really good for this because you can flick through quickly and you can find something pretty sharpish, and that's the beauty of the preset pack. So you can see it makes the world of difference having this particular bass to having a more solid and tighter bass. And the differences are night and day. Yes, the second one, the bad layer, is a little bit too loud, but we're going to look at a few other techniques to improve the bass that we already have as well. That leads me on to tip number 2. If we jump into this synth, we can use velocity controls. And now the velocity control is different for each synth, so it does the same thing, it's just the way it interacts with the synth could be different. But here in Vital, we can just drag and drop that onto any parameter we want to control. And 2 of the main things that you might use velocity on as standard is the output level of your oscillators and maybe the filter. And we're going to look at both. Both are attached currently to the velocity, so I'm going to show you here what is connected, and then you can experiment with this yourself. So the first one here you can see is connected to cutoff 1 in the filter. And looking at the first one, we can see filter 1 cutoff is set about 1/4 of the way around. So here is the corresponding node for the velocity on filter 1. It's attached to the cutoff, and you can see a little green bar appear just here where the mouse is when we hover over that. So you can see this is going to be the minimum value, so this is going to be the softest. No matter how soft you hit those keys, that will be the minimum value, and the hardest is going to be around here, so about halfway on this analog 12 dB low pass. And that's going to be when you hit the keys harder. So you're going to get a little bit of humanization added into the sound when you actually start messing around with the velocity sensitivity. This is also attached here, as you can see, to oscillator 1, and it's attached to the level. So if we go over here, we can see it's attached to the level, and the corresponding node is attached to velocity. And you can see that the minimum value is going to be set to here, about 1 o'clock on the level, and then this is going to increase that to around 3 o'clock, as you can see by the green bar, and that's going to be the loudest value for the hardest hit note. Just the same as this, but now controlling volume. So now we have 2 dynamics that are going to control this bass pattern. So let's have a look at this pattern. We're going to use one of these bars to show off the velocity sensitivity, controlling the filter cutoff and the level of the oscillator, and then this one's going to be left as you can see already. So I'm just going to crudely draw these in so you can hear volume differences. Let's just make these last ones a bit louder so we can have them more pronounced. So you can hear there's a little bit more groove and it has a little bit more dynamic. It's got some range in there and it's very subtle, but it works because once you start building your effects chain and using sidechain as a creative style, you're starting to make this drive even more than just a straight rhythm. If you're going for something really straight and hard hitting, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but you're going to lack a little bit of movement in your bass. So let's make this even more pronounced. I'm going to turn these right down so we can't hardly hear these ones. And listen again. So essentially what we're doing here, anything that's really loud becomes like an accented note. And this is especially handy for creating grooves. If we listen to this first bit on a loop with the kick and let's just say the hats for now. Has tons of energy and has loads of character. The second half, where we haven't applied any velocity, so you can hear the bass is a little bit too loud because we haven't got that velocity control, so everything's just kind of coming at you at full volume. Whereas this one here has a lot more dynamic, but you can get really creative and there's nothing stopping you building a few extra layers on top of this using these extreme techniques to create accented notes. Finally, let's take a look at LFOs really quickly. Let's have a look at some of the uses that we can use for the LFOs. So you can use a third-party plugin LFO if you want to, a volume shaper that you can obviously change into the shape of a sine wave or a triangle, and that is absolutely fine, and we can control some parameters elsewhere in the signal chain, or we can create them and use them in the synth. So the quickest way I can show you is in the synth. So here we have a few different things. I'm going to choose a sine wave so we can see we've got a nice smooth curve now, and we can set the frequency and the rate it plays down here. So let's attach LFO 1 for now. Because this is a mid bass, we can maybe utilize the stereo a little bit. It's something that I wouldn't do, but it's just to demonstrate that we can use these as shapers. So let's drag LFO 1 across to pan of oscillator 1 here. Now you can see it's only one-sided from the center to the right, and if we go that way, center to the left. You can use the keyboard shortcut, or you can head to the matrix and you can see LFO 1 to oscillator 1 pan. We can just click here and that will set it to bipolar mode, and now when you drag this around, it'll actually go opposite directions from the center point. And that's what we're looking for here, just to create a bit stereo width, make it moving back and forth. So let's go to the extremes. So you can see here it's on trigger mode and it's not actually doing anything. So let's just set this to sync. So you can hear now that we've got some panning left and right at quite a nice pace. So arguably it's a little bit too much. So let's just drag that down. So we've got something fairly light there, and we'll remove this hat. So it's another trick that you can use to help the bass just sit a little bit further back in the mix so it's not as up front, depending on how much of that drive you need from that bass. And just be careful with this sort of stuff. You don't want to overdo it and actually create more issues than you originally had. You just wanted a bit of width. Now we've got problems with things sounding like they're too wide, the bass is not as down the center anymore. So we're doing this on a mid bass, so we've got a little bit of room to maneuver and maybe do some light panning back and forth just to give it a little bit more energy. But we don't want to just go the full left and right back and forth, because we get that obvious effect, but we're now distorting the bass from being kind of straight down the center, especially in the subby areas. You don't want to do this at all. You want everything to be mono and just keep it nice and tight. And don't be afraid to use LFOs and volume shapers on different parameters. These are just a couple that I've shown you to help generate a little bit more drive and a little bit more movement in your bass. But you can utilize it on things like effects and just gently move things around. We can have a second filter and we can move a high pass around, so we get a bit of low information. Then in the second portion of the bass, it's got a little bit of high information, it's lost its bass. And that creates a little bit of movement. Just don't go too crazy with it. And here we are at the end of the video with 3 tips for better trance basses. As always, if you enjoyed the video, drop a comment down below with anything related to this video. I'll be happy to answer. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe and the bell icon so you can see the weekly Demis Hellen videos that come out on varying topics from trance to electronic music production. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.